How can a man be erased by his own family, forced to spend Christmas Eve alone, yet still hold the power to shatter their entire world overnight? My son thought he could humiliate me, push me out of the company I helped build, and then celebrate without me. But by the end of Christmas, the news was talking about my name and my revenge. The silence in my apartment on Christmas Eve was deafening. Frank Mercer, that's me, 62 years old, chairman and co-owner of Mercer Industries, sitting alone at a table set for one. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built an empire worth hundreds of millions, employed over 3,000 people, and yet here I was, microwaving a frozen dinner because my own family had decided I wasn't welcome at Christmas. The group text had arrived 3 days earlier, sent by my ex-wife Julia to the family chat. Frank, we've talked about this. It would be better if you didn't come for Christmas this year. Things are still tense after the board meetings, and we think it would just make everyone uncomfortable. Let's give it some space. My son Ethan had added his own message minutes later. Sorry, Dad, but Mom's right. Maybe we can do something in January when things settle down. Even my daughter Sylvie had remained silent in the group chat, though she'd sent me a private message later. I'm sorry, Dad. I wanted to fight for you, but Ethan says it's better this way. I hope you understand. I understood perfectly. They were erasing me, one holiday at a time. I'd spent 34 years building Mercer Industries from a small construction company into a regional powerhouse. I'd missed countless dinners, school plays, and family vacations to ensure that company survived and thrived. I'd put my children through the best schools, bought Julia her dream house, and created a legacy that should have lasted generations. Now, at 62, when I'd finally started thinking about stepping back and enjoying some well-deserved retirement, my own son was orchestrating my removal from the company and apparently from the family as well. My phone buzzed with notifications from the company's social media accounts. The annual Mercer Industries Christmas party was in full swing at the Riverside Country Club. I scrolled through the photos. Ethan in his perfectly tailored suit, raising a toast to the future of Mercer Industries. Julia, radiant in her designer dress, laughing with the board members' wives. The entire executive team gathered around the Christmas tree, everyone smiling and celebrating. Everyone except me. I'd built that tradition. The first company Christmas party had been held in our tiny office break room in 1989, with folding chairs and grocery store cookies. Now it was a black tie affair at the most exclusive venue in the city, and I wasn't even invited to attend. Well, that wasn't entirely true. I had been invited, in the most humiliating way possible. Against my better judgment, I decided to make an appearance at the party. I needed to maintain some semblance of dignity to show that I wasn't completely broken by their machinations. I put on my best suit, the navy Armani that Julia had bought me for our 20th anniversary, and drove to the country club. The moment I walked into the ballroom, I felt the shift in energy. Conversations quieted, smiles became forced. People who had worked for me for decades suddenly found their drinks fascinating. Ethan was holding court near the bar, surrounded by the younger executives and several board members. He was 38 years old, charismatic, and undeniably talented. He was also my son, though some days I wondered where I'd gone wrong in raising him. And that's why we need to be bold in our expansion plans, Ethan was saying, his voice carrying across the room. The construction industry is changing rapidly, and companies that cling to old methods and old thinking will be left behind. Old thinking. He might as well have pointed directly at me. I approached the group, and Ethan's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered his composure. Dad, I wasn't sure you'd make it tonight. Wouldn't miss it, I replied evenly. This party was my idea, after all. An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Mara Rivers, our CFO, cleared her throat. Frank, how are you enjoying your transition period? Transition period. As if I were a piece of outdated equipment being phased out. I'm taking things day by day, I said. Still learning about all the changes being made to the company I founded. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. We're not changing the core values, Dad. We're just modernizing our approach. Of course, I said. Innovation is important, though I've always believed that experience and wisdom have their place too. Before Ethan could respond, the company photographer appeared. Mr. Ethan, could we get a photo of you with the executive team for the annual report? I started to step forward, but the photographer's next words stopped me cold. Oh, and we'll need one with the board of directors for the website. Just the active board members, of course. Active board members. I was still technically chairman of the board, but apparently that title had become ceremonial without anyone bothering to tell me. I watched as they arranged themselves for the photo, my position in the group gradually shifting from center to edge until I found myself standing awkwardly at the periphery. When the photographer finished, people began to drift away, leaving me standing alone. "Mr. Mercer?" A young woman from HR approached me hesitantly. "I have a gift bag for you. These are for our emeritus board members." Emeritus. Retired. Put out to pasture. I accepted the bag with a gracious smile, though inside I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest. The bag contained a company-branded coffee mug, a desk calendar, and a small plaque thanking me for my years of dedicated service. Years of dedicated service. As if I were a middle manager who'd hit his pension and decided to move to Florida. I stayed for another hour, nursing a single scotch and watching my life's work celebrate without me. Julia was there, of course, playing the role of the proud mother and supportive ex-wife. She caught my eye once across the room and gave me a pitying smile that made my skin crawl. When I finally left, no one seemed to notice. Back in my apartment, I sat in my leather chair and stared out at the city lights. My laptop was open on the coffee table, showing my calendar. Most of the entries for the next few weeks had been canceled or marked as optional attendance. But one appointment remained highlighted. Meeting with Len, 12/27. Leonard Patton had been my lawyer and friend for over 20 years. He'd handled the incorporation of Mercer Industries, my divorce from Julia, and countless business deals over the years. Our post-Christmas meeting was supposed to be routine, a year-end review of my legal affairs and estate planning. But as I sat there in the silence of my apartment, listening to the distant sounds of a city celebrating Christmas Eve without me, I realized that meeting might be more important than I'd originally thought. I opened my laptop and began scrolling through files I hadn't looked at in years. Corporate bylaws, partnership agreements, stock ownership documents. The original buy-sell agreement that Len had insisted we include when we incorporated, despite my protests that it was unnecessary. "You never know when relationships might change," he'd said at the time. "Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it." Len had always been a wise man. I spent the rest of Christmas Eve reading through documents and taking notes. By the time midnight struck, I had a much clearer picture of exactly where I stood and what options were available to me. My phone remained silent. No Christmas wishes from my children, no calls from old friends, no messages from the executives who owed their careers to my mentorship, but that was fine. I'd spent Christmas Eve learning something very valuable. I wasn't nearly as powerless as my family believed me to be. In fact, I was beginning to realize that I held considerably more power than anyone. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. While my family was undoubtedly gathered around Ethan's Christmas tree, opening presents and celebrating their successful coup, I was finally seeing the situation for what it really was. This hadn't happened overnight. The erosion of my position had been gradual, methodical, and carefully orchestrated. I made myself coffee and sat down to trace the timeline of my own downfall. It had started 2 years ago, not long after my 61st birthday. Julia had taken me to lunch at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated our engagement 35 years earlier. I'd thought it was a nostalgic gesture, perhaps even a sign that we might reconcile our differences. I'd been wrong. "Frank," she'd said over appetizers, "I've been talking to Ethan about the company." "Oh?" I kept my voice neutral, though a warning sensation was already creeping up my spine. "He's 36 now. He's proven himself in every department. The board respects him. Don't you think it's time to start thinking about succession planning?" Succession planning. The phrase that would shadow the next 2 years of my life. "I'm 61, Julia. I'm not finished yet." She'd laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course not. But successful companies plan for transitions. Look at what happened to Henderson Construction when old Bill had his heart attack. The company nearly collapsed because there was no clear succession plan." I'd agreed to think about it, which was my first mistake. Within weeks, Julia had convinced Ethan to schedule a series of informal discussions about the future of Mercer Industries. These discussions gradually became formal meetings. The formal meetings became board presentations. The board presentations became policy proposals. And somewhere along the way, I'd gone from being the founder and leader of my own company to being the old man who was graciously being allowed to stay involved during the transition period. The changes had been subtle at first. Ethan began attending client meetings that I'd previously handled alone. His business cards were redesigned to emphasize his title as president. New marketing materials featured his photo more prominently than mine. My corner office, the one I'd occupied for 15 years, was renovated to create a more collaborative workspace. The renovation involved removing my personal touches, repainting the walls, and installing modern furniture that looked like it belonged in a tech startup rather than a construction company. When I'd objected, Mara Rivers had smoothly explained that the changes were part of a company-wide modernization initiative designed to attract younger talent and project a more contemporary image. My new office was smaller, located down the hall from my original space. It was perfectly functional, Mara assured me, and the move would allow Ethan to be more centrally located for his expanded responsibilities. I'd moved my belongings on a Friday afternoon, carrying boxes of awards, family photos, and mementos from 3 decades of building the company. By Monday morning, a rising star from our commercial division had been installed in my old office. My name was still on the door of the new space, but it felt temporary, like a hotel room. The family dinners became exercises in strategic planning disguised as casual conversation. Julia would invite me to join her and the children at Romano's or the Riverside Grill, and inevitably the conversation would turn to business. "Dad, I've been thinking about our expansion into the residential market," Ethan would say, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "I think we're missing opportunities by sticking to commercial projects." "Residential is a different animal," I'd reply. "The margins are thinner, the clients are more demanding, and the liability issues are completely different." "But that's exactly my point," Ethan would counter, his voice taking on the patient tone one uses with a confused elderly relative. "You're thinking about how things used to be. The residential market has evolved. There are new financing models, new construction techniques, new customer expectations." Julia would nod approvingly. "Ethan's been doing his research, Frank. Maybe it's worth listening to fresh perspectives." Fresh perspectives. As if my 34 years of experience in the construction industry were somehow stale and irrelevant. Sylvie would usually try to bridge the gap between us. "Dad has a point about the liability issues," she'd say carefully. "But maybe there's a way to test the residential market on a smaller scale." At 34, Sam was the director of human resources and the only member of my family who seemed to remember that I'd built the company they were all so eager to revolutionize. But even she was walking a tightrope, trying to maintain family harmony while the battle lines were being drawn. The board meetings became increasingly uncomfortable. Ethan would present elaborate PowerPoint presentations outlining his vision for the company's future. The slides were professionally designed, full of charts and graphs and industry buzzwords that made his proposals sound inevitable and modern. My objections began to sound defensive and outdated, even to my own ears. "I understand Dad's concerns," Ethan would say after I'd raised questions about cash flow or risk management. "But we can't let fear of change prevent us from growing. Every successful company has to evolve or risk becoming obsolete." The board members, most of whom I'd personally recruited over the years, would nod thoughtfully. They respected my experience, but they were also practical business people who could see which way the wind was blowing. Mara Rivers was particularly disappointing. I'd promoted her to CFO 3 years earlier, recognizing her sharp analytical mind and strategic thinking. But as Ethan's influence grew, her loyalty shifted with mathematical precision. "The numbers support Ethan's projections," she would say during board meetings, her voice professionally neutral. "The residential market represents significant growth potential, and our current capital position allows us to absorb the initial investment risk." She was probably right, from a purely financial perspective, but she was also abandoning the man who'd given her the opportunity to prove herself in favor of the man who represented her future advancement. The final insult came 3 months ago, when I arrived at the office to find my personal files boxed up and stacked in the corner of my new office. My former assistant, apologetically explained that there had been a reorganization of administrative support, and that my files were being archived for efficiency. Archived. Like historical documents that might be occasionally useful for reference, but were no longer relevant to daily operations. I'd spent that evening going through the boxes, sorting through contracts I'd negotiated, projects I'd managed, and relationships I'd built over 3 decades. It felt like attending my own funeral. But as I sat in my apartment on Christmas morning, surrounded by those same files, I realized that my family had made a critical error in their calculations. They'd been so focused on pushing me aside that they'd forgotten to check whether I'd actually agreed to go. And they'd definitely forgotten to check what legal options I still retained. I opened my laptop and pulled up the corporate documents that Len had filed when we incorporated Mercer Industries in 1990. The buy-sell agreement was buried in the appendices, written in the dense legal language that I'd barely paid attention to at the time. But reading it now, with the clarity that comes from betrayal, I found it fascinating. The agreement included a change of control provision that allowed any shareholder to trigger a sale of their shares at fair market value if they determined that the company's management or direction had fundamentally changed from the original business plan. The provision required no board approval, no family consensus, no lengthy negotiation period. just proper legal notice and an independent valuation. I owned 42% of Mercer Industries. Ethan owned 38%, inherited from shares I'd gifted to him over the years as part of my estate planning. The remaining 20% was held by key employees and board members, 42% of a company valued at approximately $800 million. I reached for my phone and scrolled to Len's contact information. He told me once that he always kept his phone on during holidays in case of legal emergencies. "Merry Christmas, Frank," he answered on the second ring. "Please tell me this isn't about a construction accident." "Merry Christmas, Len. No accidents. But I do have a legal question that can't wait until our meeting." "I'm listening." "That buy-sell agreement you insisted on 28 years ago, the change of control provision, is it still enforceable?" There was a long pause. "Frank, what exactly are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about whether my son has forgotten that I still own this company." Another pause. "The provision is absolutely enforceable. But Frank, if you're considering what I think you're considering, we need to talk about this in person. There are implications." "I understand the implications, Len. The question is whether it's legal." "It's legal, but Frank, that's all I needed to know. I'll see you on the 27th. I hung up and stared out at the city. Somewhere across town, my family was celebrating Christmas, secure in their belief that they'd successfully maneuvered me into retirement. They were about to learn that I'd been playing chess while they were playing checkers, and I was very good at chess. The day after Christmas, I drove to Mercer Industries headquarters with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The building was mostly empty, just security guards and a skeleton maintenance crew, which was perfect for what I needed to do. I used my keycard to access the executive floor and walked to my old office. Through the glass walls, I could see that it had been completely transformed. The heavy oak furniture I'd chosen was gone, replaced by sleek modern pieces that looked like they belonged in a tech company. The walls that had once displayed my awards and photos from groundbreaking ceremonies now featured abstract art and motivational posters about innovation and disruption. The young executive who now occupied the space had personalized it with his own touches: a putting green in one corner, a standing desk, and a wall-mounted monitor displaying real-time stock market data. It was as if I'd never existed. I made my way to the company's records room, a secure area where we maintained physical copies of all important documents. My access card still worked, another oversight on their part. I spent 2 hours methodically photographing documents with my phone, board meeting minutes from the past 2 years, financial projections, client contracts, and personnel files. I paid particular attention to the records of Ethan's modernization initiatives and their actual performance versus projected results. What I found was illuminating. Ethan's residential expansion had cost the company $12 million in startup costs and had generated less than $3 million in revenue. His streamlined project management system had resulted in cost overruns on 4 major commercial projects. His decision to bid aggressively on a municipal contract had landed us in a legal dispute that was still ongoing. None of these failures had been discussed at family dinners or board meetings. Mara's financial reports had skillfully buried the losses in broader categories and focused on growth potential rather than actual results. My son was not only pushing me out of the company, he was running it into the ground while doing so. I copied everything to a secure USB drive and locked it in my home safe. Then I made a phone call to an old acquaintance. Harrison Blackwood was the CEO of Titan Construction, our largest regional competitor. We'd known each other for 20 years, sometimes as adversaries bidding on the same projects, sometimes as allies when industry issues required a unified response. "Frank Mercer," he said when he answered, sounding genuinely pleased. "How the hell are you? I heard through the grapevine that you were stepping back from day-to-day operations." "Something like that," I said. "Harrison, are you free for a drink this week? I have a business proposition that might interest you." "Now you've got my attention. When and where?" "Thursday evening, the bar at the Riverside Hotel, 7 o'clock. "I'll be there. Should I bring my lawyer?" I smiled. "That won't be necessary. This is just a conversation between old friends." We met at the hotel bar, a dimly lit space with leather chairs and the kind of discretion that comes from catering to business executives who prefer their conversations to remain private. Harrison was 65, a self-made man who'd built Titan Construction from a small residential contractor into a major player in commercial and industrial projects. He was also someone who understood the value of opportunity when it presented itself. "You look good, Frank," he said as we settled into a corner booth. "Retirement must be agreeing with you." "I'm not retired yet," I said, though there seems to be some confusion about that. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Family business can be complicated." "Indeed." I signaled the bartender for another round. "Harrison, What would you say if I told you that Mercer Industries might be available for acquisition? His scotch glass stopped halfway to his lips. I'd say that's the most interesting thing I've heard all year, but I'd also say that your son doesn't strike me as someone who's looking to sell. My son doesn't own the company. I do. Harrison set down his glass carefully. Frank, I'm going to need you to be a little more specific about what you're suggesting. I spent the next hour explaining the situation in broad strokes. I didn't share family details or personal grievances, but I made it clear that I was exploring options for my 42% stake in the company. The shares would give you effective control, I explained. Combined with your existing operations, the merged company would dominate the regional market. What kind of timeline are we talking about? Soon. Very soon. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his mind clearly racing through the possibilities. Frank, this would be a massive acquisition. I'd need to involve my board, arrange financing, conduct due diligence. The due diligence can be expedited. I have access to all relevant financial documents. As for financing, I'm not looking for cash. What are you looking for? Stock swap. Your shares in the merged company, plus a consulting contract that keeps me involved in strategic decisions. I want to be part of building something new, not pushed aside to make room for someone else's vision. Harrison nodded slowly. And your son? My son will learn that actions have consequences. We shook hands on a preliminary agreement to explore the deal further. Harrison would have his team prepare a formal proposal, including valuation and terms. I would provide the financial documents necessary for due diligence. Frank, Harrison said as we prepared to leave, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Once we announce, there's no going back. Your family relationships? My family relationships were destroyed the moment they decided I was an embarrassment to be hidden away, I said. I'm 62 years old, Harrison. I'm not ready to spend the rest of my life being treated like a relic. Fair enough. I'll have something for you to review by early next week. I drove home feeling more energized than I had in months. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I was taking action instead of simply reacting to other people's decisions. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I called Sylvie and asked her to meet me for lunch. She agreed, though I could hear the hesitation in her voice. We met at a small cafe near her apartment, far from the restaurants where we might encounter other family members or business associates. Dad, you look... She paused, searching for the right word. Different? Determined. It's been a while since I've seen you look like that. I smiled. I've been doing some thinking about my situation, and about yours. Sam shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Dad, if this is about Christmas, I'm sorry. I wanted to fight for you, but your brother made it clear that supporting me would hurt your career prospects. She nodded miserably. He didn't say it directly, but the implication was clear. The company is moving in a new direction, and people need to decide whether they're part of the future or stuck in the past. And what do you think about this new direction? Sam was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee absently. Honestly, I think Ethan is making some good changes, but he's also making some serious mistakes. The residential expansion was premature. We didn't have the expertise or the systems in place. The cost overruns on the Morrison project were completely avoidable if someone with more experience had been managing the timeline. But you can't say that in meetings. Not without being labeled as resistant to change. She looked up at me with tired eyes. Dad, I love this company. I love working there. But it's becoming a place where experience is treated as a liability, and questioning decisions is seen as disloyalty. What if I told you that situation might be changing soon? What do you mean? I leaned forward. I mean that your brother has made the mistake of assuming that I'm powerless. He's forgotten that I still own this company, and that ownership comes with options. Sam's eyes widened. Dad, what are you planning? I'm planning to remind everyone that Franklin Mercer is not ready for the retirement home just yet. You're scaring me a little. Good. Your brother should be scared too. He's been playing games with other people's livelihoods, making decisions based on ego instead of experience. It's time for him to face some consequences. I reached across the table and took her hand. Sam, I want you to know that whatever happens in the next few weeks, it's not about hurting you or damaging your career. It's about saving the company we both love from someone who's too arrogant to realize he's destroying it. What do you need me to do? Nothing. Just be prepared for some changes, and remember that sometimes the best way to preserve something valuable is to take dramatic action before it's too late. We finished lunch with small talk about her apartment and her boyfriend, but I could see her mind working through the implications of our conversation. That evening, I received an email from Ethan's assistant with the agenda for the New Year's board meeting. The subject line read, Transition Planning and Organizational Restructuring. The agenda included a presentation on leadership succession and a proposal for emeritus board positions. Emeritus board positions. They were planning to make my marginalization official. I forwarded the email to Len with a simple message. Meeting moved up. Can you be ready by January 2nd? His reply came back within minutes. I've been ready since you called on Christmas. Are you sure about this? I typed back, never been more sure of anything in my life. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting my own agenda for the January 2nd board meeting. It was going to be a very interesting new year. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of careful preparation and quiet determination. While my family undoubtedly spent their time planning my ceremonial removal from the company, I was orchestrating something far more dramatic. Len's law office became my second home during those days. We met every morning at 8 o'clock, reviewing documents, confirming legal procedures, and anticipating every possible challenge to our plan. The buy-sell agreement is ironclad, Len assured me for the third time as we sat in his conference room on December 29th. The change of control provision gives you the right to sell your shares at fair market value if you determine that the company's management or strategic direction has fundamentally changed from the original business plan. And the valuation process. We'll use Hartman and Associates. They're the independent valuation firm specified in the original agreement. I've already contacted them, and they can have a preliminary assessment ready by January 1st. What about the board? Can they challenge the sale? Len shook his head. The beauty of this provision is that it doesn't require board approval. It was designed to protect minority shareholders from being trapped in a company that had been taken in a direction they didn't support. Ironically, your son's aggressive changes to the company's focus and management structure provide perfect justification for triggering the clause. I smiled grimly. So his modernization efforts are actually going to be the legal basis for my exit. Exactly. And Frank, I have to say, Harrison's offer is remarkably generous. The stock swap values your shares at a 15% premium to market value. Plus, the consulting contract gives you significant influence in the merged company's strategic decisions. The consulting contract had been Harrison's idea. I don't want to just acquire your shares, he'd told me during our second meeting. I want to acquire your expertise. 34 years of industry knowledge doesn't walk out the door when you sell your stock. It was exactly what I'd hoped to hear from my own son, and exactly what I'd never received. On December 30th, I made one final visit to Mercer Industries headquarters. The building was quiet, with most employees still on holiday break, but I needed to collect a few personal items and take one last look at what I was about to leave behind. My current office felt sterile and temporary, nothing like the space where I'd spent 15 years building relationships and making decisions that shaped the company's future. I packed the remaining photos and awards into a small box, leaving behind the generic corporate artwork and motivational posters that someone had installed to make the space feel contemporary. As I walked through the empty corridors, I found myself remembering the early days when the entire company had occupied a single floor of a converted warehouse. We'd had 12 employees then, including myself, and everyone knew everyone else's name. We'd celebrated every new contract like a victory, because in those days, every contract was a victory. Now we employed over 3,000 people across 4 states, and the executive floor felt more like a corporate hotel than the heart of a family business. I stopped outside my old office, Ethan's office now, and looked through the glass walls at the sleek modern furniture and high-tech gadgets that had replaced my more traditional setup. A large monitor on the wall displayed a rotating slideshow of company projects, including several that I'd personally managed but that now bore only Ethan's name as project lead. History was being rewritten in real time, and I was being erased from my own legacy, but not for much longer. On New Year's Eve, I had dinner alone at Romano's, the same restaurant where Julia had first suggested that I consider succession planning. I requested the same table where we'd sat that day, and I ordered the same meal I'd eaten while listening to her explain why my own son was better qualified to run the company I'd built. The irony was perfect. As I ate, I reviewed the final documents that Len had prepared for the next day's board meeting. The sale agreement with Titan Construction was signed and ready for execution. The independent valuation had been completed, confirming that my 42% stake was worth approximately $336 million. The legal notice required by the buy-sell agreement had been drafted and notarized. Everything was ready. My phone buzzed with a text message from Julia. Hope you're having a nice New Year's Eve, Frank. Looking forward to a fresh start in 2024. A fresh start. She had no idea how fresh it was going to be. I spent New Year's Day in quiet preparation, reviewing my notes and mentally rehearsing the presentation I would give at the board meeting. I decided to keep it simple and professional. No emotional outbursts, no personal recriminations, just a clear explanation of my decision and the legal framework that supported it. At 6 o'clock, Harrison called to confirm that his team was ready to proceed. "The merger documentation is complete," he said. "My board approved the acquisition unanimously. We're ready to announce as soon as you give the word." "The word will be given tomorrow at 9:30, I said. "Your PR team should be prepared to release the announcement by 10 o'clock. "Frank, I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain about this? Once we announce, the story will be picked up by every business publication in the region. There's no putting this genie back in the bottle." "Harrison, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." At 8 o'clock, Sylvie called. "Dad, I just wanted to wish you luck tomorrow. I know the board meeting is going to be difficult." "It's going to be interesting," I said. "Sam, I want you to know that I'm proud of the work you've done at the company. You've built the HR department into something special, and that's going to serve you well regardless of what happens next." "Regardless of what happens?" "Dad, you're making me nervous." "Don't be nervous. Be ready for change. And remember that sometimes change comes from unexpected directions." "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you know." After we hung up, I poured myself a scotch and sat in my leather chair, looking out at the city lights one last time from this apartment. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Tomorrow, the man who'd been dismissed as an aging relic would remind everyone that experience and patience were not weaknesses, they were weapons. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the city that had given me everything and taken it away. Tomorrow, I would take it back. January 2nd dawned crisp and clear, the kind of winter morning that made everything seem sharp and defined. I woke up at 5:30, earlier than necessary, but I'd barely slept anyway. After 34 years in business, I'd learned to recognize the feeling that comes before a pivotal moment, the mixture of anticipation and calm that settles over you when you know you're about to change everything. I went through my morning routine with deliberate precision: shower, shave, coffee, and the morning news. The business report mentioned that several major companies were expected to announce significant developments in the new year. They had no idea how significant. I dressed carefully in my best Navy suit, the same one I'd worn to sign the original incorporation papers for Mercer Industries in 1990. It seemed appropriate. At 7:30, Len called to confirm that all the documents were ready and that the legal notices had been properly filed. "The valuation is final, the sale agreement is executed, and Titan's legal team has confirmed they're ready to proceed," he said. "Frank, I have to tell you, in 30 years of corporate law, I've never seen a more perfectly executed strategic maneuver." "Let's see how perfect it is after the meeting," I said. "Are you nervous?" I considered the question. "No, I'm ready." At 8 o'clock, I received a text message from Ethan. "Looking forward to today's meeting, Dad. I think you'll be pleased with the transition plan we've developed." Transition plan. He was so confident, so certain that he was in control of the narrative. He was about to learn otherwise. I arrived at Mercer Industries headquarters at 8:30, giving myself time to settle in before the 9 o'clock meeting. The building was buzzing with activity as employees returned from their holiday break, but the executive floor was quiet except for the soft hum of preparation. As I walked down the hallway toward the boardroom, I passed my old office one final time. Ethan was inside, reviewing notes for his presentation, his back to the glass wall. He looked confident and relaxed, every inch the successful young executive who was about to formalize his takeover of the family business. In a few minutes, that confidence would be shattered. The boardroom was already set up for the meeting, with leather chairs arranged around the polished conference table and a large monitor ready for Ethan's PowerPoint presentation. Coffee and pastries had been arranged on the side table, the kind of thoughtful touches that made corporate power plays feel civilized. I took my usual seat at the table, the same chair I'd occupied for hundreds of board meetings over the years. Today would be my last. Board members began arriving at 8:50, Harold Westbrook, our longest-serving outside director, Patricia Hawkins, who'd joined the board 3 years earlier, Dr. Mason Fitzgerald, who represented our institutional investors, and several others who'd served faithfully for years. Mara Rivers arrived with a stack of financial reports, looking professionally polished and completely prepared for what she believed would be a routine formalization of the company's new leadership structure. Sylvie entered at 8:55, offering me a nervous smile as she took her seat. She'd dressed carefully for the meeting, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. At exactly 9 o'clock, Ethan strode into the room with the confidence of a man who owned the world. He was carrying a leather portfolio and wearing his most expensive suit, every detail calculated to project authority and success. "Good morning, everyone," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming in early in the new year. I know everyone is busy getting back into the swing of things, but I wanted to start 2024 with some important announcements about the company's future direction. Harold Westbrook, as the senior outside director, called the meeting to order. Ethan, I believe you have a presentation for us? I do. Ethan activated the wall monitor, and his first slide appeared. Mercer Industries, a new era of leadership. As we begin this new year, Ethan said, I want to talk about the incredible progress we've made in modernizing our operations and positioning the company for sustained growth. The initiatives we've implemented over the past 2 years have transformed Mercer Industries from a traditional construction company into a dynamic, forward-thinking organization that's ready to compete in the modern marketplace. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline of his innovations, the residential expansion, the new project management systems, the aggressive bidding strategies that had supposedly revolutionized our competitive position. What the slide didn't show were the cost overruns, the failed projects, and the legal disputes that had resulted from those same innovations. The board has been incredibly supportive of these changes, Ethan continued, and I'm pleased to report that our strategic vision is beginning to pay dividends. Revenue growth in our new residential division exceeded projections by 12% in the fourth quarter. I almost smiled. Revenue growth of 12% on a division that had lost $9 million net was hardly something to celebrate, but Ethan had always been gifted at presenting selective statistics. However, Ethan said, his tone becoming more serious, sustainable growth requires clear leadership and unified vision. That's why I'm proposing that we formalize the leadership transition that has been evolving organically over the past 2 years. He clicked to a new slide. Proposed organizational structure. The slide showed an organizational chart with Ethan as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board. My name appeared in a small box at the bottom, labeled Chairman Emeritus, Advisory Role. Chairman Emeritus. They were making me a figurehead. This structure, Ethan explained, allows us to honor Dad's incredible contributions to the company while ensuring that day-to-day leadership rests with executives who are fully engaged in current operations and future planning. Patricia Hawkins raised her hand. Ethan, what exactly would the Chairman Emeritus role entail? Primarily advisory functions, Ethan replied smoothly. Dad would be available for consultation on major strategic decisions, and of course he'd continue to be invited to all board meetings and company events. But the operational responsibilities would shift to executives who are more directly involved in current projects and client relationships. More directly involved, as if I'd been playing golf for the past 2 years instead of watching my company make costly mistakes. The compensation package for the emeritus position is quite generous, Mara added, consulting her notes. Full salary and benefits, plus a consulting fee for any specific projects where Frank's expertise might be valuable. They were offering to pay me to be irrelevant. Harold looked around the table. This seems like a reasonable transition plan. Frank, what are your thoughts? All eyes turned to me. Ethan was smiling confidently, certain that I would graciously accept the face-saving offer they'd crafted for me. I stood up slowly and walked to my briefcase, which I'd placed on the side table. I removed a thick folder of documents and returned to my seat. I appreciate the thought that went into this proposal, I said calmly, but I'm afraid I have a different plan for my future with Mercer Industries. Ethan's smile faltered slightly. Dad, I think if you consider the benefits of this arrangement... Ethan, I interrupted gently. I'm going to need you to stop talking for a few minutes. I opened the folder and removed the first document, the independent valuation of my 42% stake in Mercer Industries. I've had the company independently valued as of December 31st, 2023, I said, sliding copies of the report across the table to each board member. As you can see, my ownership stake is worth approximately $336 million. Confused murmurs arose around the table. Mara was frowning at the valuation report, trying to understand why I would have commissioned such a study. I've also reviewed the buy-sell agreement that was included in our original incorporation documents, I continued, removing the next set of papers. Specifically, Section 12, Subsection C, which allows any shareholder to sell their stake if they determine that the company's management or strategic direction has fundamentally changed from the original business plan. Ethan was no longer smiling. Dad, what are you doing? I'm exercising my rights as a shareholder, I said. Based on the dramatic changes in company focus, management structure, and strategic priorities over the past 2 years, I've determined that Mercer Industries is no longer the company I founded. Therefore, I'm triggering the change of control provision and selling my shares. The room erupted in shocked voices. Patricia was flipping through the legal documents, Harold was staring at me in disbelief, and Mara was frantically calculating numbers on her phone. You can't do this, Ethan said, his voice rising. This company is our family legacy. You can't just sell it out from under us. Actually, Len said from the doorway, where he'd been waiting for his cue, he can. The buy-sell agreement is legally binding and requires no board approval. Mr. Mercer has followed all required procedures. I removed the final document from my folder, the executed sale agreement with Titan Construction. I've sold my 42% stake to Harrison Blackwood and Titan Construction, I announced. The sale was completed at market value plus a 15% premium and includes a 5-year consulting contract that ensures my continued involvement in strategic decisions. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at the documents as if they might disappear if he looked at them hard enough. This is impossible. You can't have done this without telling us. I just did, I said calmly. Mara found her voice first. Frank, this changes everything. Titan will have effective control of the company. What happens to current management? What happens to our employees? That will be determined by the new ownership structure, I said, though I suspect that Harrison will be very interested in retaining employees who demonstrate competence and loyalty. The implication was clear. Ethan's position was no longer secure. Harold cleared his throat. Frank, I have to ask, why didn't you discuss this with the board? We might have been able to address your concerns about the company's direction. Harold, you've had 2 years to address my concerns. Instead, you've watched quietly while I was systematically marginalized and my experience was dismissed as outdated thinking. You've supported initiatives that have cost this company millions of dollars and created legal liabilities that we're still dealing with. I stood up and gathered my documents. The sale is final and legally binding. Titan Construction will be announcing the acquisition within the hour. I suggest you prepare appropriate communications for employees and clients. As I walked toward the door, Ethan's voice stopped me. Dad, you've destroyed our family business. You've destroyed everything we built together. I turned back to face him. No, Ethan. You destroyed it when you decided that my 34 years of experience was less valuable than your 2 years of MBA theories. You destroyed it when you chose to humiliate me rather than work with me. You destroyed it when you told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. This is about Christmas? Julia's voice came from the doorway. She'd arrived just in time to witness the aftermath of my announcement. Frank, you're destroying a multi-million-dollar company because your feelings were hurt? No, Julia. I'm saving a multi-million-dollar company from someone who is destroying it through arrogance and inexperience. The difference is that now I'll be working with people who value what I bring to the table. I walked out of the boardroom and down the hallway, leaving behind 34 years of my life and the family that had forgotten what I was worth. As I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking. Titan Construction acquires majority stake in Mercer Industries in surprise deal. The news was already spreading. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone was ringing. Dad, Sylvie's voice was shaking. What is on the news? I smiled as I got into my car. That's your answer, sweetheart. That's what's on the news. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt like Franklin Mercer again. I drove home in silence, letting the magnitude of what I'd just accomplished settle over me like a warm blanket. 34 years of building, 2 years of humiliation, and 15 minutes of perfectly executed revenge. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls from reporters, business associates, and former employees who'd seen the news breaking across every major business outlet in the region. I ignored them all. There would be time for interviews and explanations later. For now, I wanted to savor the moment. But first, I had one call to make. I pulled into my apartment complex parking garage and dialed Harrison's number. Frank, he answered immediately. I've been watching the news coverage. How did the board take it? About as well as you'd expect. Ethan looked like he'd been hit by a truck. The rest of the board is scrambling to figure out what this means for their positions. And your family? I thought about Ethan's shocked face, Julia's accusatory tone, and Sylvie's confused loyalty. They're learning that actions have consequences. Well, for what it's worth, my team is ecstatic. We've been trying to break into Mercer's market share for years, and now we're not just competing with you, we're partnering with you. The combined company is going to dominate the regional construction market. That's the plan, I said. Harrison, I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work. I'm not just selling out. I'm buying into something new. I'm counting on it. Frank, there's something else you should know. About an hour after our announcement hit the wire, I got a call from Ethan. He wanted to discuss a counteroffer. I wasn't surprised. What did you tell him? I told him that the sale was final and legally binding, but that we'd be happy to discuss his future role in the combined company. He didn't seem interested in that conversation. Of course he wasn't. Ethan had spent 2 years positioning himself as the visionary leader who was modernizing a stodgy old company. The last thing he wanted was to work for the outdated father he'd just finished marginalizing. He'll come around, I said, or he won't. Either way, we'll build something successful. After we hung up, I went up to my apartment and poured myself a scotch. It was only 11 in the morning, but some occasions called for a celebration regardless of the time. I was halfway through my drink when my phone rang. Sylvie. Dad, I just got out of an emergency meeting with HR and the executive team. Everyone is panicking. Nobody knows what's going to happen to their jobs, their projects, their benefits. The entire company is in chaos. Change is always chaotic at first, I said calmly. But Harrison is a good businessman. He's not going to destroy valuable assets or alienate productive employees. What about Ethan? What about Mom? Dad, you've just blown up our entire family. I sighed. Sam, our family was blown up the moment they decided I was an embarrassment to be hidden away. I didn't create this situation. I just refused to accept it. But couldn't you have tried to work things out? Couldn't you have talked to Ethan about your concerns instead of this? I spent 2 years trying to work things out. I watched quietly while my experience was dismissed, my office was taken away, and my role in the company was systematically diminished. I tried to be patient and understanding while your brother made costly mistakes and blamed me for being resistant to change. I took another sip of scotch. And then they told me not to come to Christmas because I would make everyone uncomfortable. That's when I realized that patience and understanding were being interpreted as weakness. So you decided to destroy everything? No, sweetheart. I decided to save everything. Mercer Industries was heading for serious trouble under your brother's leadership. The residential expansion has been a disaster. The cost overruns are mounting, and the legal liabilities from his aggressive bidding strategies could have bankrupted us within 2 years. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Sam, are you still there? I'm here. I'm just processing. Dad, what happens now? What happens to me? You'll be fine. You've built an excellent HR department, and Harrison values competence. If anything, your position will be stronger in the combined company because you'll have opportunities for advancement that didn't exist in the old structure. And Ethan? Ethan will have to decide whether he wants to be part of the solution or continue being part of the problem, but that's his choice to make. After we hung up, I turned on the television to watch the business news coverage of the acquisition. The story was being covered as a major regional development, with analysts discussing the implications for the construction industry and speculation about the internal dynamics that had led to such a dramatic move. This appears to be a classic case of generational conflict in a family business, one analyst was saying. Franklin Mercer, the company founder, apparently felt that his role was being diminished by younger management and decided to exercise his ownership rights in a very public way. Another analyst disagreed. I think this is more about business strategy than family dynamics. Mercer Industries has been struggling with some high-profile project overruns and legal issues. This merger with Titan Construction gives both companies access to new markets and resources that they couldn't achieve independently. They were both right, in their own ways. My phone rang again. This time it was Julia. Frank, what have you done? Her voice was ice-cold with fury. Do you have any idea what you've just put this family through? Ethan is devastated. The entire company is in chaos. And for what? Because we didn't invite you to Christmas? Julia, this has nothing to do with Christmas dinner and everything to do with the systematic destruction of everything I built over 34 years. Ethan was trying to modernize the company. He was trying to ensure its future success. Ethan was trying to erase me from my own legacy while running the company into the ground with his inexperience. Did you know that his residential expansion has lost $9 million? Did you know that his project management changes have resulted in cost overruns on every major contract this year? Those are growing pains. Those are failures, Julia. Expensive failures that could have destroyed the company if they'd continued unchecked. So you decided to sell the company to our biggest competitor instead of trying to fix the problems? I decided to partner with someone who values my experience instead of treating it as an obstacle to overcome. Julia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Less angry, more calculating. What do you want, Frank? What will it take to undo this? It can't be undone, Julia. The sale is final and legally binding. Everything has a price. Harrison Blackwood is a businessman. If we offered him enough money to walk away... Julia, stop. This isn't about money. This is about respect and competence and the future of a company that I've dedicated my life to building. I'm not interested in buying my way back into a situation where I'm treated like a relic. Then what? You're just going to work for Titan Construction now? I'm going to work with Titan Construction to build something better than what we had before. Something where experience is valued instead of dismissed, where decisions are made based on competence instead of politics. And your family, your children? I looked out the window at the city where I'd built my empire and lost my family. My family made their choice when they decided I was an embarrassment. Now they'll have to live with the consequences of that choice. After Julia hung up, I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet of my apartment. Outside, the city was going about its normal business, unaware that one man's family had just imploded in the most expensive way possible. But I didn't feel sad or regretful. I felt free. For the first time in 2 years, I was working with people who wanted me there. For the first time in 2 years, my experience was being treated as an asset instead of a liability. For the first time in 2 years, I was building something instead of watching it be torn down. My phone, despite being turned off, somehow managed to buzz one final time. A text message that had been delayed in delivery. It was from Ethan, sent from the boardroom just after I'd walked out. "Dad, please call me. We can work this out." I deleted the message without responding. Some things couldn't be worked out. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt, but sometimes burning bridges was the only way to build something better on the other side. I raised my glass in a toast to the empty apartment. "Merry Christmas, Frank," I said aloud, "and Happy New Year." Outside my window, the city sparkled in the winter sunshine, full of possibilities I'd forgotten existed. Tomorrow, I would start building again, but today I was going to enjoy my revenge.